The Amazon rainforest holds many secrets, but none as unsettling as what Evan Morales discovered. A respected wildlife biologist seeking solitude, Evan built a simple wooden cabin near the river's edge, ignoring warnings from local tribespeople who refused to stay after sunset. The first week was peaceful, documenting rare species, collecting water samples, settling into a new rhythm. Then came the knocking. 3 distinct raps on his door at midnight, precise as clockwork. No footprints in the morning, no signs of visitors. When he installed motion sensors and cameras, they captured nothing. Yet the knocking persisted, growing louder each night. What ancient guardian was trying to drive him away? What lies beneath the soil where his cabin stands? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Evan Morales stood on the wooden deck of his newly built cabin, watching the Amazon River flow past like liquid copper in the sunset. At 52, his weathered face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades squinting into microscopes by day and staring at distant horizons by dusk. He opened his worn leather journal, its pages swollen from humidity, and carefully noted the date, his 7th day in this remote outpost. Water samples show unusual microbial activity near the eastern bank, he wrote in precise handwriting, possibly related to the seasonal fluctuation, though local varieties demonstrate unexpected adaptive behaviors. His pen hovered over the page. The scientific observations were easy. It was the personal reflections that still caught in his throat like fish bones. After 30 years of meticulous field notes, he still struggled with the unquantifiable. First week completed without incident. Cabin is holding well against the elements. Elena would have... He stopped writing. 2 years since cancer had taken his wife, and still her absence punctured his thoughts daily. He closed the journal without finishing the sentence. Boston University had been sympathetic but clear. Take the sabbatical or face a formal review. His colleagues had noticed the slipping quality of his work, the missed deadlines, the uncharacteristic errors, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered the faculty lounge, the concerned glances from graduate students when he trailed off mid-lecture, lost in memories. This research grant to study declining Amazonian river species had been his lifeline. 6 months in isolation, with nothing but science and silence, exactly what he needed to rebuild himself. "You're running away," his daughter Maya had said during their last video call. "Dad, there are grief counselors, support groups. You don't need to disappear into the jungle." Perhaps she was right, but Evan had always processed his emotions through work. Elena had understood that about him. He tucked the journal into his shirt pocket and surveyed his simple domain. The cabin was small but functional. 1 main room, with his research equipment, a compact kitchen area, a small bathroom with rainwater collection system, and a sleeping alcove. Solar panels provided enough electricity for his instruments and laptop. He'd insisted on building near the river, despite the Universidad Nacional recommending a location closer to the nearest village. The locals had been polite but reserved when he'd visited to purchase supplies. The older villagers especially had watched him with unreadable expressions when he mentioned where he was building. "The river has old spirits," the shopkeeper had said while wrapping dried goods in brown paper. "They do not always welcome new neighbors." Evan had nodded respectfully, while mentally cataloguing the comment as traditional, ecological wisdom expressed through cultural mythology, the kind of thing he'd reference in a footnote of a peer-reviewed paper. He understood the importance of indigenous knowledge in conservation work, but ultimately, his faith was in empirical observation and data. As darkness settled around the cabin, he fired up his laptop to review the day's findings. The river contained several species on the verge of extinction, their populations decimated by illegal mining operations upstream and climate change impacts on water temperature. His work could help establish protections for this entire ecosystem. The night sounds of the Amazon engulfed the cabin, insect choruses, distant howler monkeys, the occasional splash in the river. Evan found it soothing after years of Boston street noise. He prepared a simple dinner of beans and rice, ate at his desk while reviewing specimen photographs, then readied himself for bed. Tomorrow would bring more sample collection, more data points, more small discoveries. This was how he would rebuild his purpose. One observation at a time, one species documented, one ecosystem potentially saved. He switched off the solar lamp and settled onto his narrow cot. Through the window, the quarter moon reflected on the river's surface, breaking into fragments with each gentle ripple. For the first time in months, he felt something like peace. He couldn't have known that the following night would change everything. The morning sun had barely risen above the tree line when Evan swung the machete, clearing away the thick undergrowth. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the early hour, the Amazon's humidity already oppressive. He'd spent 3 days searching for the perfect location. This clearing, slightly elevated above the floodplain, with unobstructed access to the river, was ideal. "You build here?" Carlos, the head builder from the village, had asked with unmistakable hesitation when they arrived. The local man's eyes darted between the clearing and the river, as if looking for something Evan couldn't see. "Is there a problem?" Evan wiped his brow with his sleeve. Carlos exchanged glances with the 3 other workers. "Many better places upriver, ground more stable." "The soil composition is perfect here," Evan responded, kneeling to scoop up a handful of earth. "Well-drained, but close enough to water. My equipment needs to be near the collection sites." The workers spoke quietly in their dialect. Evan caught only fragments, something about old boundaries and midnight, but he'd encountered similar superstitions throughout his career. Indigenous peoples developed deep connections to their environments, often attributing spiritual significance to ecologically important areas. Usually such beliefs indicated something scientifically relevant. "Double pay for all 4 of you," Evan said, standing. "But I need the foundation started today." Money settled the matter, at least temporarily. The men worked efficiently, digging post holes for the elevated cabin platform, while Evan marked dimensions with string. By midday, they had the foundation layout complete. Miguel, the youngest worker, gave a startled cry when his shovel struck something hard. "Problem?" Evan asked, approaching. Miguel pointed wordlessly into the hole. Nestled in the dark soil lay what appeared to be a small, perfectly round stone, unnaturally smooth and faintly iridescent despite being buried. "Interesting," Evan said. Reaching for it, Carlos grabbed his wrist. "Leave it." "Not good to take." Evan hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. We'll dig the post hole elsewhere." As they shifted to a new position, Evan noticed Carlos discreetly placing something in the dirt, a small bundle wrapped in leaves. "What's that?" "Protection," Carlos said simply. The cabin took shape over the next 4 days, a rectangular structure raised on sturdy wooden posts with a tin roof to withstand tropical downpours. Simple but functional, with reinforced walls to house Evan's sensitive equipment. The men worked steadily, but refused to stay past 4 in the afternoon, no matter how much extra Evan offered. On the final day, Carlos approached Evan as the others loaded their tools into the motorized canoe. "When night comes," he said, his voice low, "no good to answer if something calls." Evan frowned. "Calls?" "Sometimes river people, they knock to ask permission. Better not to answer." Carlos pressed something into Evan's palm, a small wooden carving of a river dolphin. "Keep this above your door." Before Evan could ask more questions, Carlos hurried to the boat. The engine sputtered to life, and the workers departed with unusual haste, glancing back at the cabin until they disappeared around the river bend. Evan examined the carving, then placed it on his equipment table, forgotten as he unpacked his research gear. The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity, setting up his water testing station, arranging solar panels for optimal exposure, organizing specimen containers. By sunset, exhaustion overtook him. He sat on his newly constructed porch with a simple meal, watching fireflies emerge along the riverbank. The cabin had turned out well, a single room with partitioned sleeping area, workspace for his equipment, and basic amenities. The university funds had stretched further than expected with local labor and materials. That night he slept deeply, lulled by the symphony of forest sounds. His dreams were vivid, swimming through clear waters, following something just beyond his vision, a sensation of being watched by ancient eyes. He woke refreshed, ready to begin his research in earnest. The morning light streamed through the windows as he organized his field notes and prepared collection containers. The machete he'd used to clear the land now hung beside the door. Evan paused as he passed it, noticing unusual patterns forming on the blade, not ordinary rust, but symmetrical markings that resembled tiny handprints. He touched them curiously before dismissing it as mineral deposits from the iron-rich soil. There was work to be done, specimens to collect. The mysteries of the Amazon awaited, though not the kind he had come to study. Dawn filtered through the misty rainforest as Evan waded knee-deep into the cool river waters. His collection case hung at his side, specialized compartments ready for the day's samples. For the past week, he had established a methodical routine: mornings for specimen collection, afternoons for analysis, evenings for documentation. The river's edge near his cabin had already yielded 3 previously uncatalogued fish species and a water beetle with remarkable adaptations. Today, he focused on microbial samples from various depths and distances from shore. Remarkable diversity in such a limited area, he murmured to himself, carefully extracting river water into sterile vials. Each sample was meticulously labeled with GPS coordinates, time, and depth. A splash larger than the gentle ripples caught his attention. 20 meters downstream, something broke the surface momentarily, too large for the fish species he'd documented so far. Evan grabbed his camera, but whatever it was had disappeared. Probably caiman, he noted in his waterproof field journal. Yet something about the movement hadn't seemed reptilian. The shape had been almost human. By midday, his collection case was filled with properly preserved specimens. Back at the cabin, Evan transferred samples to his portable laboratory setup. The university had spared no expense with his equipment: a high-powered microscope, centrifuge, spectrometer, and various testing apparatus occupied nearly half the cabin's main room. The first water samples revealed expected microorganisms, though in unusually high concentrations. The third sample, however, taken from a spot where the river seemed to well up from below, contained something he'd never seen before. "What are you?" Evan whispered, adjusting the microscope's focus. The microorganisms moved with apparent purpose, forming and reforming into patterns that seemed almost deliberate. He switched to a higher magnification, and for a brief moment, the pattern resembled tiny human faces before dissolving back into random movement. Evan blinked hard. The isolation was clearly affecting his perception. He documented the microorganisms with clinical detachment, noting their unusual motility and apparent sensitivity to light. That evening, as darkness settled, Evan noticed something strange about the samples he'd stored in the collection case. One vial emitted a faint blue glow. He checked his notes. This was the sample from the upwelling spot in the river. Under controlled darkness, the bioluminescence became clearly visible. The light pulsed gently, approximately once per second, like a heartbeat. Bioluminescent organisms weren't uncommon in aquatic environments, but he'd never documented this species before. And the rhythmic nature seemed unusual, potentially significant discovery, he recorded in his research log. Unnamed bioluminescent microorganism with synchronized illumination patterns. He prepared slides for further examination tomorrow and secured the glowing sample in his collection case. If the luminescence persisted, he would need to modify his preservation methods to document this characteristic properly. Outside, the forest had fallen into the deep silence that sometimes preceded rain. No insects chirping, no distant howler monkeys, just the gentle sound of the river flowing past his cabin. Evan stepped onto his small porch, scanning the starlit sky for approaching storm clouds. Instead, his attention was drawn to the river's edge, where a faint glow, similar to his sample but much larger, seemed to move slowly along the shoreline. He grabbed his flashlight and field glasses, but by the time he focused on the spot, the light had vanished. Had it been a reflection of the moon on water? But the crescent moon was barely providing any light tonight. Sleep came fitfully that night. Evan dreamed of swimming through luminous water, following glowing trails that led deeper and deeper into the river. In the dream, he could breathe underwater, moving alongside creatures that were neither fully fish nor human. They led him towards something ancient buried in the riverbed, something that wanted to be found. He woke suddenly at 3 a.m., his heart racing. The cabin was dark, except for a soft blue glow coming from his work table. The sample in the collection case was glowing more intensely than before. As he watched, half asleep and disoriented, the light pulsed 3 times in rapid succession, like knocking. Evan sat upright, fully awake now. The sample continued its regular heartbeat-like pulse. He must have imagined the pattern. Tomorrow, he would contact the university about his findings. Tonight, though, he couldn't shake the feeling that his discovery was somehow more significant than simple bioluminescent microbes. That something in the river had noticed him too. Evan jolted awake, disoriented in the darkness. Something had pulled him from a deep sleep, a sound. He fumbled for his watch, 12 a.m. precisely. The grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom he'd insisted on shipping to this remote location, had stopped ticking. Then he heard it again. 3 distinct knocks on his cabin door. Firm, deliberate, not the random tapping of a branch or nocturnal animal. He sat motionless, listening. The sounds of the rainforest at night had become familiar after 2 weeks. The constant insect chorus, occasional splash from the river, distant calls of night birds. But now an unnatural silence had fallen, as if the forest itself was listening. 3 more knocks, slightly louder. "Hello?" Evan called, reaching for his flashlight. "Is someone there?" No response. He swung his feet to the floor, heartbeat quickening. The university wasn't sending anyone for weeks. The villagers avoided this area after dark. Carlos had made that abundantly clear. So who could be outside his door at midnight? The rational explanations scrolled through his mind. Perhaps a traveler in distress, maybe one of the indigenous people overcoming their superstitions to deliver an urgent message, or simply a large bird landing on his porch. 3 final knocks, powerful enough to rattle the hinges. Evan approached the door cautiously, flashlight gripped tightly. "Who's there?" he called again. Silence. He took a deep breath and opened the door in one swift motion, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. The porch was empty. The night air hung heavy with humidity, but utterly still. No breeze to move branches, no footsteps retreating into the underbrush. Evan stepped outside, sweeping his light across the clearing. The beam caught something at the forest edge. 2 reflective points, like eyes watching him. When he focused the light directly there, nothing remained. "Hello? Do you need help?" he called into the darkness. Only the distant sound of the river answered. Shaken, Evan retreated inside, securing the door latch. The digital clock on his research equipment confirmed the time, 12:05 a.m., but the grandfather clock remained frozen at midnight. Its pendulum motionless despite being wound yesterday. Sleep eluded him for hours. Evan catalogued possible explanations. Perhaps a local playing tricks, testing the foreigner's courage. Maybe the knocking had been a dream, his mind manufacturing the sound to coincide with the clock's coincidental stopping. By morning, the incident had taken on the quality of a half-remembered nightmare. The grandfather clock had resumed its steady ticking, though running slightly behind. Evan noted it would need adjustment later. He threw himself into his work, analyzing yesterday's samples and preparing equipment for another collection run. The mysterious bioluminescent microorganisms continued to flourish in their sealed container. still pulsing with that peculiar rhythm. While examining the riverbank that afternoon, Evan noticed something unusual in the muddy soil near the water's edge. Impressions that looked almost like footprints, but smaller than any child's and oddly distorted, as if the toes were elongated and slightly webbed. He photographed them from multiple angles, then made a plaster cast of the clearest print. Whatever had made these tracks had approached directly from the river, walked in a circle on the shore, then apparently returned to the water. The stride pattern suggested bipedal movement, yet no local animal matched these characteristics. Possible new species, he noted in his journal, though without much conviction. The impression seemed too human-like, despite the anatomical differences. That evening, Evan decided to prepare for another nocturnal visit. He positioned his video camera facing the door, set his audio recorder nearby, and lined the porch with a thin layer of fine sand that would capture any footprints. As midnight approached, Evan sat at his desk, pretending to work while watching the door. The grandfather clock ticked steadily toward 12, each movement of the pendulum heightening his tension. At precisely midnight, the pendulum froze mid-swing. The cabin fell silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The first knock came, followed by 2 more in quick succession. Evan remained still, watching his instruments. The video camera showed nothing unusual at the door, but the audio recorder's levels spiked with each knock. 3 more knocks, harder this time. Is someone there? Evan called, forcing his voice to remain steady. A long silence followed. Then something new, a sound like water dripping onto the wooden porch, slowly forming a puddle that seeped under the door. Evan rose cautiously. The final sequence of knocks rattled the entire cabin, strong enough to shift his research papers on the desk. When dawn broke, after a sleepless night, Evan found the sand outside undisturbed. But where the water had seeped under his door, tiny, perfect handprints were visible on the wooden floor, smaller than a child's, with slightly elongated webbed fingers, and they led directly toward his bed. The village seemed unnaturally quiet as Evan approached in his small motorboat. Children, who had previously watched him with curious eyes, were nowhere to be seen. 2 elderly women sorting fish glanced up at his arrival, then quickly looked away, whispering to each other. Evan secured his boat and walked toward the village center. The small handprints from his cabin floor photographed and stored on his phone. His scientific mind had spent the morning cycling through rational explanations. A previously undocumented primate species, perhaps, or an elaborate prank. But each theory collapsed under the weight of impossibility. The general store doubled as the village's social hub. Inside, conversation halted abruptly when Evan entered. The shopkeeper, Manuel, nodded in recognition, but said nothing as Evan purchased coffee and rice. "I need to speak with someone about the river," Evan finally said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Something unusual is happening at my cabin." Manuel's expression remained carefully neutral. "What kind of unusual?" "Knocking at midnight. 3 times a glass jar crashed to the floor behind him. An old woman had dropped her purchase, her eyes wide with something between fear and vindication. "I told you," she said in Spanish to Manuel. The stranger built on their ground. Manuel shook his head slightly, silencing her. "You should speak with Elder Thomas," he told Evan. "He knows the old stories." 20 minutes later, Evan sat in a small hut at the village edge, facing a man whose age was impossible to determine. Thomas might have been 70 or 90, his copper skin mapped with deep lines, but his dark eyes remained sharp and evaluating. "I heard knocking at my door," Evan explained. "But when I opened it, no one was there. It happened twice now, and this morning I found these." He showed Tomas the photographs of the small handprints. The elder studied the images without surprise. "You built where the river people buried their guardians." "River people? Before my grandfather's grandfather, they lived here. Not like us. They belonged to both worlds, land and water." Tomas made an undulating gesture with his hand. "When the conquistadors came with disease and weapons, many tribes were lost. But the river people, they went deeper, deeper into the water. They became more fish than human. But their guardians remain, watching the boundaries. Evan struggled to maintain his scientific composure. "With respect, Elder Thomas, I'm looking for a practical explanation. Perhaps a local animal." "No animal knocks 3 times, Professor. The number has meaning. It is a warning, then a question, then a demand." Thomas leaned forward. "They are asking permission to enter your dreams, to show you what lies beneath. You have disturbed something important to them." "What exactly did I disturb?" "The wooden faces. Did you not find them yet?" Evan's pulse quickened. "No, what wooden faces?" "Carved vessels for the guardian spirits. Hundreds were buried in sacred places along the river. Your cabin stands on such a place." The elder sighed deeply. "The knocking will not stop. It will grow stronger until you answer or leave." "What happens if I answer?" Thomas studied him carefully. "They will show you why you must go. Or perhaps why you must stay. The river has its own wisdom." The elder rose stiffly and went to a small wooden chest. He returned with a clay disc, no larger than Evan's palm, covered with intricate spiral patterns that seemed to lead into a central eye. "Place this above your door. It cannot stop them, but it will show you are seeking understanding." Thomas pressed the amulet into Evan's hand. "The river guardians are not evil, Professor. They protect something ancient and powerful. If you choose to stay, you must listen carefully to what they try to show you." As Evan turned to leave, the elder called after him. 3 knocks has meaning. First knock is for the world above. Second for the world below. Third for the space between, where their kind and our kind can sometimes meet. Back at his cabin, as afternoon faded into evening, Evan placed the clay amulet above his door. Scientific skepticism warred with primal instinct. He'd built his career on observable phenomena, measurable data, reproducible results. Yet the handprints on his floor defied conventional explanation. He set up additional cameras, positioned to capture every angle of the cabin. His audio recorder was calibrated to maximum sensitivity. If something knocked tonight, he would document it completely. As midnight approached, Evan sat at his desk, instruments ready. The river seemed unusually calm, its surface like black glass reflecting the quarter moon. 12 o'clock came. Then 1 minute passed. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Evan exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. Perhaps the amulet had actually worked, or more likely, whatever had caused the knocking had moved on, its curiosity satisfied. At precisely 12:15, his collection case containing the luminescent water samples began to glow intensely. As Evan watched, transfixed, the light pulsed 3 times, slowly, deliberately. The knocking hadn't stopped. It had come inside. Sleep became Evan's enemy. For the 3rd night, he jolted awake at midnight, this time to find his research equipment activating on its own. Specimen containers glowed with that eerie blue luminescence, pulsing in triplets. His cameras turned on without command. The cabin's temperature dropped dramatically, his breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. 3 knocks, not on the door, but on the underside of his floor. "I hear you," Evan said aloud, his scientific detachment fracturing. "What do you want?" Silence answered him, but the air felt charged, expectant. Evan's voice strengthened. "I'm conducting research to protect the river. I'm not here to harm anything." The knocking responded. 3 sharp raps directly beneath his feet, loud enough to make him jump. He grabbed his camera, determined to document whatever was happening. Through the viewfinder, he saw nothing unusual, but when he reviewed the footage immediately after, strange orbs of light appeared where nothing had been visible to his naked eye. Morning brought no relief. Circling his cabin in the dawn light, Evan discovered small, bare footprints in the mud, dozens of them forming concentric circles around his dwelling. They emerged from the river and returned there, the pattern too deliberate to be anything but intentional. Evan spent the day setting up more sophisticated monitoring equipment. The university had provided cutting-edge technology, including infrared motion sensors that could detect minimal temperature variations. He positioned them strategically around the cabin's perimeter and beneath the floorboards where the knocking had originated. His rational mind still searched for explanations. Perhaps gas pockets in the riverbed causing percussive sounds? Underground water movements creating pressure changes? But these theories couldn't account for the footprints, the handprints, the precise timing of events. As evening approached, Evan prepared his most thorough documentation attempt yet. Multiple cameras with various light filters, audio recorders with enhanced sensitivity, the motion sensors set to maximum detection capability. His email to the university remained unsent in his drafts folder. How could he explain what was happening without sounding unhinged? Better to gather incontrovertible evidence first. At 11:45 p.m., Evan began his systematic observation protocol, all equipment activated and recording, sensors online and monitored through his laptop. The amulet from Elder Thomas still hanging above his door. Though it had proven ineffective the previous night, at precisely midnight, the sensors triggered simultaneously, all of them inside and outside the cabin. On his laptop screen, heat signatures appeared where nothing was visible, small, humanoid forms moving around his cabin and approaching the door. 3 knocks, louder than ever before. The infrared display showed a small figure directly outside, its hand raised against the door. "I can see you," Evan said, his voice unsteady. "What do you want from me?" A new sound emerged, a low, melodic humming that seemed to come from the river itself. The sensors inside the cabin triggered, showing heat signatures moving through solid walls. The knocking pattern changed, no longer 3 distinct raps, but a continuous, rhythmic sequence that sounded almost like language. Evan grabbed his recorder, determined to capture this development. The temperature continued to drop until frost formed on the inside of his windows. Impossible in the Amazon climate. Something brushed against his leg. Evan looked down to see nothing, but the infrared sensor showed a small figure standing beside him, reaching upward. His scientific resolve crumbled as primal fear took hold. He retreated to the center of the cabin, surrounded by invisible presences that his equipment detected but his eyes could not see. The knocking crescendoed, now coming from all surfaces, walls, floors, ceiling, even his research table. The water samples in their containers began to bubble and churn without heat source. One container cracked, spilling luminescent water that moved against gravity, flowing upward to form patterns on the wall, patterns that resolved into a crude drawing of what looked like his cabin with something underneath it. "What's beneath my cabin?" Evan asked, addressing the unseen presences directly. The humming stopped. The knocking ceased. In the sudden silence, a whispered word emerged from everywhere and nowhere. "Leave." The infrared sensors went wild, showing dozens of small figures filling the cabin, surrounding Evan, some even passing through his body. The sensation was like being submerged in ice water. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The sensors showed the figures retreating, passing through walls and floor, returning to the river. The temperature gradually normalized. The luminescent water lost its glow and dripped normally to the floor. Evan stood frozen in the center of his cabin, the equipment having captured everything, yet revealing nothing that conventional science could explain. On his laptop screen, the final infrared image showed a single figure remaining, standing directly over a specific spot on his floor, pointing downward before it too faded from detection. Beneath that exact spot, something waited to be discovered. The river mailboat arrived only once a month to the remote research stations dotting the Amazon. When it appeared at Evan's makeshift dock, the captain kept the engine running, refusing to disembark. "Packages for Dr. Morales," he called, extending a waterproof bag at arm's length. His eyes darted nervously to the cabin, then back to the river. "You should come back with me. Bad place here." Evan took the bag. "I'm in the middle of important research." The captain shook his head. "The old man in the village, he say to tell you, what is found should stay buried." Before Evan could respond, the boat reversed course, quickly disappearing around the river bend. The message from Elder Thomas was clear, but came too late. After the previous night's phenomena, Evan had already decided to investigate what lay beneath his cabin floor. Inside the waterproof bag were the academic texts he'd ordered weeks ago, anthropological studies of Amazonian tribes, linguistic analyses of extinct dialects, archaeological surveys. But buried among them was something unexpected. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. A note attached in Elder Thomas's handwriting. "Read this first." The journal belonged to Dr. Lawrence Cranston, a British explorer who had ventured into this same region in 1872. The handwriting was faded but legible, the account disturbing. April 17, 1872. Our expedition has established camp near an unusual rock formation the natives refuse to approach. They call it the Gateway and speak of guardians that emerge at night. Santos, our guide, warned of knocking sounds that should never be answered. The natives' superstitions would normally amuse me, but there is something about this place that silences laughter. Evan flipped forward several pages. April 21st. The knocking began last night. 3 distinct raps upon our tent posts, precisely at midnight. Wilson believed it to be one of our porters playing tricks. We found no one when we looked, yet discovered small footprints around our camp come morning, like those of children, but misshapen. His hands trembled as he turned to the final entries. April 30th. I alone remain. The others fled after Williams disappeared 2 nights ago. His bed was empty morning, a trail of wet footprints leading from his cot to the river. I have documented the carvings uncovered beneath our camp, hundreds of wooden faces arranged in concentric circles. The native legends speak of vessels containing guardian spirits who protect something ancient within the river. I have begun to believe the final entry was a hurried scrawl. They are knocking again. Louder now. The faces we unearthed have begun to weep river water. I understand now they guard the passage between worlds. I hear voices promising knowledge beyond mortal comprehension if I answer the 3rd knock. May God forgive my curiosity. The journal ended there. According to a newspaper clipping tucked in the back, Dr. Cranston was never found. The expedition's porters reported he simply vanished one night, leaving behind his meticulous notes about an indigenous tribe with unique physiological adaptations for amphibious life. Evan set the journal aside, his scientific skepticism battling with the undeniable parallels to his own experience. The cabin suddenly felt like a thin shell between worlds, one he understood and one he didn't. The infrared data from the previous night had pinpointed a specific location on his floor. With methodical precision, Evan began removing floorboards, documenting each step with photographs and careful notes. The exposed soil was darker than the surrounding earth, more densely packed. He began to dig carefully, using archaeological techniques to preserve whatever lay beneath. 3 inches down, his trowel struck something solid. Brushing away soil revealed smooth, curved wood, unnaturally preserved despite the humid climate. Further excavation uncovered what appeared to be the top of a carved face, eyes closed, expression serene, the craftsmanship extraordinarily detailed for something so ancient. Evan worked methodically through the afternoon, uncovering not just one carving, but the edge of what appeared to be many more, arranged in a pattern he couldn't yet discern. The face he had exposed was part of something larger, something deliberately placed. As sunlight faded, Evan faced a decision: continue working into the night, or wait until morning. The memory of Dr. Cranston's fate urged caution, but scientific curiosity pushed him forward. He set up powerful work lights and continued digging, gradually exposing more carved faces, each unique yet connected to the others in a circular pattern. The soil between them was interlaced with what appeared to be preserved river reeds woven into complex symbols. At 11:45 p.m., Evan's trowel broke through to a hollow space beneath the carvings. Cool air rushed upward, carrying the unmistakable scent of river water. Midnight was approaching, and something waited below. Midnight approached with the inexorability of fate. Evan positioned himself beside the excavation, night vision goggles modified with specialized filters strapped to his face. The equipment, originally designed for deep-sea research, had been adjusted to detect wavelengths beyond normal human perception. If something manifested tonight, he would see it. His laptop recorded feeds from multiple cameras. Audio equipment captured even the slightest sound. If science could document the inexplicable, he had the tools to do it. The exposed wooden face carvings seemed to watch him with their closed eyes. 7 had been partially uncovered, arranged in what appeared to be the beginning of a spiral pattern, extending deeper and wider beneath his cabin. The hollow space his trowel had broken into remained a dark mystery, too small yet to explore. 58 p.m. Evan activated all recording equipment. 59 p.m. The temperature began dropping precipitously. His breath clouded before him. Midnight. Through the modified goggles, Evan saw it immediately, a faint luminescence rising from the river, moving purposefully toward his cabin. Not one entity, but many. Small, translucent figures that seemed partly human, partly something else. Their eyes reflected his infrared beams like those of nocturnal animals. They passed through his walls as if the solid structure didn't exist. Evan remained motionless, documenting everything, fighting his instinct to flee. Through the goggles, he watched the figures gather around the excavation, examining the exposed carvings with evident concern. "I'm not here to damage anything," Evan said aloud, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm trying to understand." The figures turned toward him simultaneously. One approached. Standing so close Evan could see its features clearly through the enhanced goggles. Humanoid, but with gill-like structures along its neck. Oversized eyes adapted for underwater vision, fingers and toes webbed. It was both child-sized and ancient-looking. Its skin bearing patterns similar to the carvings he'd uncovered. It reached toward him, stopping just short of touching his face. "Leave," came the whispered word, the same as before. Evan held his ground. "Why, what is this place? What are these carvings protecting?" The being tilted its head, seemingly surprised by the questions. It turned to the others, a silent communication passing between them. Then it faced Evan again, reaching for his hand instead. Scientific caution warred with curiosity. If he touched it, would that cross some final boundary? But how else would he learn? Slowly, deliberately, Evan extended his hand. The contact was like plunging into icy river water. Images flooded his mind. A thriving civilization, adapted to life both in water and on land. Their bodies evolved over thousands of years. He saw them creating the wooden carvings as vessels for their ancestors' spirits, guardians to watch over something sacred beneath the river. Then came images of conquest, disease, slaughter, the people retreating deeper into the water, their adaptations accelerating as they fled the surface world. The carvings remained, protecting the boundary between worlds. Evan gasped, breaking contact. The entity stepped back, watching him. "What are you guarding?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The being pointed downward, toward the hollow space beneath the carvings. Then all the entities moved to the excavation, gathering around it. Through the goggles, Evan watched them begin a synchronized movement, something between dance and ritual. The wooden faces he'd uncovered began to glow faintly in response. Water seeped from the carved eyes, running down the wooden cheeks like tears. But instead of falling, the water defied gravity, rising to form shapes in the air, complex symbols that shifted and changed. Evan recognized elements of chemical formulas, molecular structures. This was knowledge, ancient understanding of the river's ecosystem, healing properties of plants that science hadn't yet discovered. Water purification methods lost to modern civilization. "You're not just guardians," Evan whispered in realization. "You're keepers of knowledge." The leading entity nodded slowly. It gestured again to the hollow space, then made a spreading motion with its hands, suggesting something larger below, something extensive. Then it pointed directly at Evan, then to his research equipment, then back to the carvings. The message was clear. They were evaluating whether he was worthy of the knowledge they protected. The beings resumed their ritual movement. One by one, the wooden faces began shifting. their closed eyes opening to reveal hollow centers filled with what appeared to be clear water that glowed with bioluminescence, the same phenomenon he'd observed in his samples. As the last face opened, the hollow space beneath expanded suddenly, dirt falling away to reveal a passage large enough for Evan to enter. The entity gestured toward the opening, then held up 3 fingers. An invitation, a test, a decision to make. The clock read 12:33 a.m. The recording equipment captured everything, yet Evan knew the choice before him transcended scientific documentation. He could retreat to the safety of rational explanation, or he could follow these beings into the darkness and discover what lay beneath the river's surface. His hand reached for the flashlight. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, finding Evan hunched over his workbench, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. Soil samples from beneath the wooden carvings were arranged in precise rows, each labeled with depth and position. Under his microscope, the composition was unlike anything he'd previously encountered, a matrix of organic and inorganic materials that seemed to shift subtly even as he observed it. After his encounter with the entities, Evan had backed away from the opening beneath his floor. Scientific training had reasserted itself. He needed to document, analyze, understand before proceeding further. The passage remained, a dark invitation he wasn't yet ready to accept. The entities had vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving only damp footprints and the exposed circle of wooden faces with their now open eyes. Throughout the night, Evan had methodically collected samples, photographed the carvings from every angle, and measured the dimensions of the passage. Each wooden face was unique, different features, expressions, patterns, yet all shared a peculiar spiral motif across their foreheads. The same pattern appeared in the soil between them, in the water that had seeped from their eyes, and in the phosphorescent residue left by the entity's footprints. Evan's satellite phone connected after 3 attempts. Dr. Alvarez, his contact at the Universidad Nacional, answered with evident concern. "Evan! We expected your weekly report 2 days ago. Is everything all right?" "I've made a significant discovery," Evan said, choosing his words carefully. How much could he share without sounding unhinged? "I believe my cabin was built over an archaeological site of considerable importance. I've uncovered carved artifacts that may predate known civilizations in this region." "What kind of artifacts?" "Wooden carvings arranged in a ritual pattern. Hundreds of them possibly, and—" Evan hesitated. "I've recorded unusual phenomena associated with them." A long pause followed. "What kind of phenomena?" "I'd rather show you the data." "Could you send an archaeological team?" "This discovery warrants proper excavation protocols." Dr. Alvarez agreed to assemble a team, though it would take at least a week to organize permits and equipment. In the meantime, Evan was to document everything, but disturb as little as possible. After ending the call, Evan returned to his excavation. The morning light revealed something he'd missed during the night, a small stone disc, half buried beside one of the wooden faces. He carefully extracted it, brushing away centuries of soil. The disc fit perfectly in his palm, its surface covered with the same spiral pattern found throughout the site. Unlike the wooden carvings, it appeared to be made of a dense, polished stone, with faint blue-green veining. Despite its apparent age, it felt warm to the touch, almost vibrating with subtle energy. Evan photographed it from multiple angles before attempting any tests. When he placed it under the UV light, the spiral patterns glowed with the same bioluminescence as his water samples. When he placed it near the water samples, they became more active, the microorganisms aligning into similar spiral formations. "Some kind of resonance effect," he murmured, recording his observations. This was tangible evidence of something extraordinary, a connection between the artifacts, the water, and the entities he'd witnessed. Throughout the day, Evan expanded his excavation, carefully uncovering more of the wooden faces. They formed a perfect spiral, each one positioned precisely in relation to the others. By late afternoon, He had exposed 23 carvings, yet the pattern suggested hundreds more extending beneath the entire cabin. A new hypothesis formed. The spiral wasn't just decorative. It was mathematical, a precise golden ratio expanding outward from a central point. Whatever lay at the center must be significant. As evening approached, Evan faced the passage again. The professional team wouldn't arrive for days. Scientific protocol dictated patience, methodology, careful documentation, but the stone disc in his hand seemed to pull him toward the opening, its warmth intensifying as he approached. The spiral pattern appeared to shift subtly, as if alive under his fingertips. His modified goggles revealed faint luminescence emanating from deep within the passage, the same signature as the entities, but more concentrated, more powerful. Evan checked his equipment one final time. Multiple cameras were recording. His position was precisely documented. His satellite phone had sent updates to the university. Whatever happened next would be scientifically validated. He placed the stone disc in his pocket, adjusted his headlamp, and approached the opening. The passage appeared to descend gradually, curving in the same spiral pattern as the artifacts. Science demanded evidence, and the evidence lay below. Evan took a deep breath and entered the darkness beneath his cabin. The passage descended in a gentle spiral, its walls composed of packed earth, reinforced with ancient root systems. Evan's headlamp illuminated only a few meters ahead, the beam swallowed by darkness beyond. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the unmistakable mineral scent of underground water. Marking point 1, Evan spoke into his recorder, leaving a small LED beacon to track his path. Approximate depth 3 meters below cabin floor. Tunnel appears deliberately constructed, not natural formation. As he ventured deeper, something unexpected caught his eye. Patches of moss growing along the tunnel walls. Not the dull green of common varieties, but a pale blue-green that emitted a soft glow. When his hand passed near, the moss brightened in response, rippling with illumination that followed his movement. Unknown bioluminescent plant species, he noted, carefully collecting a small sample in a specimen container. Appears responsive to proximity or possibly body heat. The moss became more prevalent as the tunnel descended, eventually providing enough ambient light that Evan could switch off his headlamp. The patterns of illumination revealed the passage's true nature, not simply a tunnel, but a ceremonial pathway. The walls were embedded with more wooden carvings, these smaller than those beneath his cabin, but bearing the same spiral motif. The stone disc in his pocket grew warmer, almost uncomfortably so. When he removed it, the spiral pattern glowed in perfect resonance with the surrounding moss, creating complex interference patterns that shifted and flowed. Evan estimated he'd descended about 20 meters when the tunnel abruptly widened into a chamber. The moss here covered every surface, pulsing with a synchronized rhythm, like a vast, living circulatory system. At the chamber's center stood a stone pedestal with a circular depression, a perfect fit for the disc he carried. Scientific caution warred with overwhelming curiosity. Whatever purpose this chamber served, it was clearly significant to the entities he'd encountered. Placing the stone might trigger unknown consequences. Yet the patterns surrounding him suggested mathematical precision, intentional design, not random supernatural phenomena, but technology beyond current understanding. The recorder documented his whispered observations as he approached the pedestal. The chamber appears to be a node in a larger system. The moss's bioluminescent patterns suggest a form of communication or energy transfer. As Evan moved toward the center, the moss's illumination intensified, revealing additional details. The chamber floor contained a relief map of the river system, accurate but showing tributaries and underground connections not present on any modern chart. He stood before the pedestal, stone disc in hand. Its warmth had become a pulsing heat synchronized with the moss's illumination. The entire chamber seemed to await his decision. I am placing the artifact in what appears to be a designated receptor, he narrated for the recording. Time is 4:17 p.m. The disc settled into the depression with a soft click. Immediately the chamber transformed. The moss erupted in brilliant blue-white light, and the pedestal began to sink slowly into the floor. From the walls, water emerged, not flowing downward but moving horizontally in deliberate streams that formed complex, three-dimensional patterns in the air. Evan stood transfixed as the liquid structures coalesced into a moving representation of molecular bonds. DNA sequences, cellular structures, knowledge encoded in water itself. "My God," he whispered, understanding dawning. "It's a library." The water patterns shifted again, now showing human figures evolving over time, adapting to water environments, developing gills and webbed extremities. The images accelerated through centuries of change, a complete historical record of the river people's transformation. Sound behind him broke his concentration, splashing, footsteps approaching from the tunnel. Evan turned to see multiple entities entering the chamber, their translucent bodies more visible in the moss's intense light. They moved with purpose, surrounding him in a semicircle. The leader, the same one he'd touched before, approached. In its hands, it carried another artifact, a delicate crown woven from river reeds and embedded with small versions of the wooden carvings. It held the crown upward, offering it to Evan. A test, an invitation, a threshold between worlds. "You want me to put it on," Evan said. "Not a question, but a realization." The entity nodded, its oversized eyes reflecting the dancing light patterns. Every scientific instinct warned against such direct interaction without understanding the consequences. Yet the knowledge displayed around him, biological, ecological, evolutionary, represented discoveries that could transform human understanding of adaptation, perhaps even save endangered river ecosystems. Worldwide, Evan activated his body camera to document whatever happened. "Next, I am about to participate in what appears to be a ritual of knowledge exchange," he stated calmly. "If this recording is found without me, please notify Dr. Maria Alvarez at Universidad Nacional and my daughter Maya Morales in Boston." He lowered his head, allowing the entity to place the crown on his brow. The world dissolved into water and light. Consciousness returned gradually, like rising through layers of water toward distant sunlight. Evan found himself lying on the chamber floor, the crown of reeds beside him, his equipment still recording. The luminescent moss had dimmed to a soft twilight glow. The entities were gone. How long had he been unconscious? His watch read 9:43 p.m. More than 5 hours had passed in what felt like moments, but they weren't lost hours. His mind overflowed with knowledge, entire centuries of river people history, biological adaptations, ecological wisdom. He understood now what the wooden carvings truly were, not mere vessels for spirits, but sophisticated biological record keepers, each containing the complete genetic memory of an ancestor. Recording resumption at 9:44 p.m. Evan spoke, voice hoarse. "I've experienced direct knowledge transfer through some form of consciousness interface, attempting to document before memory degradation occurs." His hands shook as he withdrew his journal, frantically sketching molecular structures, writing equations, recording species names in a language he somehow now partially understood. Pages filled with information about river purification techniques, sustainable aquatic farming methods, medicinal properties of plant science had yet to classify. At the chamber's center, where the pedestal had been, something new had emerged. A small, perfectly round stone that glowed with gentle shifting colors like an opal underwater. Evan approached cautiously, scientific discipline wrestling with his overwhelming urge to touch it immediately. "New artifact present, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter," he narrated. "Composition appears similar to river sediment, but structurally transformed. The stone, no, pearl was more accurate, seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. When he finally lifted it, the sensation was immediate, not the full immersion of the crown, but a focused connection to specific memories, not his own. He saw through ancient eyes the river valley before human settlement, a thriving ecosystem in perfect balance. Then Europeans arriving, bringing disease and violence. The difficult decision to retreat deeper, to evolve beyond human limitations, to preserve their knowledge beneath the river. The careful placement of guardian carvings at sacred points to protect access to their underwater civilization. The pearl grew cold in his palm as the vision faded. Evan understood its purpose, a gift, a token of trust, a physical repository of specific memories deemed safe to share with an outsider. "I need to document everything," he muttered, pocketing the pearl and gathering his equipment. The passage that had brought him here now glowed brighter, the moss lighting his way back toward the surface. The climb seemed shorter than the descent. His mind raced with implications, the scientific papers, the conservation applications, the medicines that could be derived from this knowledge. His entire career, the decades of research, had been leading to this discovery. When he emerged through the opening in his cabin floor, the contrast was jarring, his familiar scientific equipment now seeming primitive compared to what he'd witnessed below. The wooden faces watched him with their open eyes, guardians temporarily allowing his passage. Evan transferred his recordings to his laptop, backing up everything to multiple drives. The sample of luminescent moss continued to glow in its container, responding when he moved near. The memory pearl placed on his desk cast rippling patterns of light across his cabin. Walls. His satellite phone showed multiple missed calls from Dr. Alvarez. The archaeological team had been assembled more quickly than expected. They would arrive tomorrow. Afternoon. Evan hesitated, suddenly uncertain. The river people had shared their knowledge with him alone after testing his intentions. Would they welcome a team of researchers disturbing their sacred site? The memories from the pearl suggested otherwise. Centuries of retreat from human interference, of deliberate isolation to protect their evolved way of life. "Dr. Alvarez," he said when the call connected, "there's been a development." "Evan, we've been worried. The team is ready. I need you to delay their arrival," he interrupted. "The site is more sensitive than I initially reported. I need time to prepare proper protocols." Skepticism filled her voice. What kind of sensitivity are we talking about? How could he explain that he'd encountered an evolved branch of humanity? That knowledge beyond modern science was stored in wooden carvings and water patterns. Cultural significance to local indigenous populations, he said finally. "I found evidence this site is still actively used for ceremonial purposes. We need proper permissions, appropriate spiritual guidance, a half-truth that bought time." He needed to think, to decide how much to reveal, how much to protect. After ending the call, Evan sat at his desk, the memory pearl cool beneath his fingertips. Scientific ambition warred with newfound responsibility. The discoveries here could transform human understanding of evolution, of consciousness itself, but they weren't his discoveries to share without consent. Outside, the river flowed black under moonlight. He sensed them watching, waiting for his decision. Dawn brought clarity and purpose. Evan had slept only briefly, his dreams filled with underwater cities and genetic memories not his own. The morning light revealed his cabin transformed. The excavation now occupied nearly half the floor space, the wooden faces arranged in their perfect spiral pattern, watching with open eyes. His laptop displayed dozens of files, sketches, notes, recordings from the chamber below. Knowledge that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields if published. Knowledge that could also lead to exploitation if misused. Evan connected to the university database, searching historical records with new understanding. References to water people appeared in conquistador journals, missionary accounts, and anthropological studies spanning 5 centuries, always dismissed as native. Superstition, or traveler's exaggeration, a 1692. Spanish account described fishmen who walk upright and vanish beneath the river. A Jesuit missionary in 1731 documented children with the aspects of fish who breathe water as easily as air. A British naturalist in 1847 sketched anatomical adaptations observed in river dwellers that matched precisely what Evan had seen. The memory pearl sat beside his keyboard, occasionally pulsing with internal light. When his research reached frustrating dead ends, Evan found himself touching it, receiving flashes of clarifying knowledge, locations of other guardian sites along the river, the purpose of specific wooden carvings, the language of water patterns used for communication. By midday, he'd compiled enough historical evidence to convince even the most skeptical colleague that something extraordinary existed here. Yet doubt lingered about how to proceed. His satellite phone rang. Dr. Alvarez again. Evan, the team is insistent. This discovery could be career-defining for all involved. Whatever cultural sensitivities exist, we can address them properly with the right experts present. I understand, he replied, watching the memory pearl pulse on his desk. But I've made additional discoveries that require careful consideration. Can you access the university archives for any references to underwater civilizations in this region? Specifically Spanish accounts from the late 1600s? Her skepticism was palpable. Underwater civilizations. Evan, are you feeling well? The isolation can affect one's perspective. Just check the archives, he insisted. Look for reports by Captain Diego Mendoza from the 1692 expedition. Cross-reference with indigenous myths about river guardians. After promising to investigate, Dr. Alvarez reluctantly agreed to delay the team another 48 hours. Evan turned his attention back to the memory pearl. Each interaction revealed more, but in fragments, never the complete picture. Something was missing, some key to accessing its full contents. The answer came unexpectedly. While documenting the wooden carvings, Evan knocked over a water sample. Instead of pooling normally, the water formed perfect spheres on the wooden surface, then began arranging itself into the now familiar spiral pattern. Of course, he murmured. It needs water. He filled a shallow basin with river water and gently placed the memory pearl at its center. The transformation was immediate. The water rose around the pearl, defying gravity to create a spinning three-dimensional projection of light and liquid. A map materialized before him, the Amazon River system rendered in perfect detail, but showing features no satellite had ever detected. Beneath the main waterways, an intricate network of tunnels and chambers spread like a vast circulatory system, connecting to underwater caverns where glowing points indicated settlements. Evan stared in awe. Not just a single tribe or isolated community, but an entire civilization existing parallel to the surface world. Hidden in underwater realms humans had failed to explore or even imagine. His cabin appeared on the map as a pulsing red point directly above what appeared to be a major junction in their network. No wonder they had responded so strongly to his presence. His research activities weren't just disturbing a burial site. They were threatening a central hub of their civilization. As he studied the projection, specific locations illuminated with brief scenes, communities of river people going about daily activities, children being taught in underwater chambers, elders communicating through water pattern language. Not primitive holdouts, but an advanced society with technology based on principles modern science was only beginning to understand. The holographic map suddenly expanded, revealing something even more extraordinary. The river system's connection to a massive underground aquifer spanning much of South America. The river people weren't just local to this area. They had networks extending thousands of miles, potentially numbering in the thousands. Evan's satellite phone chimed with an incoming message. Dr. Alvarez had found the references he'd mentioned, along with others. Her message contained scanned documents, official reports, dismissing the accounts as hallucination or hoax, and a final line. "What have you really found, Evan?" He stared at the message, then at the holographic map still hovering above his desk. The truth was literally floating before him, evidence of a parallel human evolution, a civilization that had chosen a different path than surface dwellers, evidence that would change everything if revealed, or destroy them if handled wrongly. Night fell again over the Amazon, bringing with it the inevitable approach of midnight. Evan no longer feared the hour, but awaited it with scholarly anticipation. The wooden faces watched him from their spiral arrangement, their eyes containing the faint glow of bioluminescent water. The holographic map had dissipated hours ago, but its revelations remained seared in his memory. His decision was made. The archaeological team would need to be permanently diverted. The knowledge he'd gained, and was still gaining, required careful stewardship, not academic exploitation. He'd composed a detailed email to Dr. Alvarez, explaining his discovery in terms scientific enough to be credible, without revealing the full truth. Cultural sensitivity, indigenous rights, and ecological preservation provided sufficient justification for restricting access to the site. Now he waited, recording equipment ready. If the pattern held, the river people would return at midnight. And he had questions that even the memory pearl couldn't answer. At precisely 1200 a.m., the familiar temperature drop signaled their arrival. Through his modified goggles, Evan watched as they emerged not from the tunnel this time, but directly through his cabin walls, moving as easily through solid matter as through water. "I've studied your map," Evan said without preamble. "I understand now why this location is important to you, and I've taken steps to protect it from outside interference." The lead entity approached, its large eyes studying him with evident curiosity. It carried something new, a transparent, crystalline object shaped like a teardrop, approximately the size of Evan's palm. Water swirled within it, catching and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. The entity held it out, clearly offering it to Evan. "Another gift?" he asked, accepting the object carefully. As soon as it touched his skin, the crystal vibrated subtly. The water inside formed tiny ripples that somehow translated into sound, voices speaking in that strange, liquid language he'd heard before, but now partially comprehensible thanks to his experiences with the memory pearl. A communication device, Evan realized aloud. "You're recording messages." The entity nodded, pointing to the crystal, then to its mouth, then to Evan. "You want me to speak into it? To record a response?" Another nod. Evan held the crystal closer to his face, feeling slightly foolish but trusting the process. "My name is Evan Morales. I'm a scientist studying the river ecosystem. I believe I understand now why you've been interacting with me. My cabin was built over an important junction in your network. I apologize for the intrusion and want to assure you I mean no harm to your people or your knowledge systems." The water inside the crystal rippled with each word, somehow capturing and storing his speech. When he finished, the entity took back the crystal and held it to its ear. The water patterns shifted again, apparently playing back his message. Satisfied, the entity returned the crystal to Evan, then gestured toward the other river people who had formed a circle around the exposed wooden carvings. They began a synchronous movement, their bodies undulating in patterns reminiscent of underwater currents. The wooden faces responded, their eyes glowing brighter. Water seeped from them, rising to form complex symbols in the air, a written language composed of liquid structures. As Evan watched, transfixed, the crystal in his hand vibrated in rhythm with the patterns, translating them into whispered words. "Guardian sight. Judgment complete. Knowledge seeker accepted." The lead entity approached again, pointing to the crystal, then to the hole in the floor leading to the chamber below. "A clear invitation to follow. You want me to come below again? Now?" The entity shook its head, pointing instead to the crystal, then to Evan's ear. It pantomimed sleeping, then waking. "I should listen to this tomorrow." After rest, an affirmative gesture. The entity then indicated the holographic map's former position, making a spreading motion with its hands, followed by pointing to various scientific instruments around the cabin. The message became clear. They were granting him permission to study them, to document their civilization, but on their terms and timeline. The crystal would provide instructions, boundaries, protocols to follow. "I understand," Evan said, "and I accept your conditions." The entity placed a webbed hand briefly on Evan's forehead, a gesture of acknowledgement or perhaps blessing. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the river people departed, passing through walls and floor to return to their underwater realm. Evan stood alone in his cabin, the crystalline recorder cool against his palm. Around him, the wooden faces had closed their eyes once more, returning to their watchful dormancy. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new understanding. For now, exhaustion claimed him, his mind struggling to process all he had witnessed and learned. As he drifted towards sleep, the crystal beside his bed pulsed gently, water patterns forming and reforming within, preparing the knowledge it would share when morning came. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin windows as Evan studied the crystalline recorder. During the night, the water patterns inside had reorganized themselves into more complex formations. When he held it to his ear as instructed, the vibrations translated into clear instructions, coordinates along the river where he should collect specific samples, temporal windows when observation would be permitted, boundaries he must not cross. More fascinating were the linguistic components being transmitted, not just isolated words, but grammatical structures, contextual modifiers, conceptual frameworks, unique to the river people's perception of reality. A language based on flow states, pressure differentials, and light refraction through water mediums. Evan recorded everything meticulously, creating a preliminary lexicon that grew by the hour. Certain concepts had no direct human equivalent, terms for perceiving both above and below water simultaneously, for communicating through pressure waves across vast distances, for sensing mineral compositions with specialized receptors. By midday, his satellite phone rang. "Dr. Alvarez again. I've reviewed your email, Evan," she began, her tone measured. "Your concerns about indigenous cultural sites are valid, but the university requires more substantive documentation before redirecting an expensive archaeological team." "I understand," Evan replied, watching the crystal pulse on his desk. "I can provide additional evidence, but I need to maintain site integrity during documentation. The board is skeptical. Some are suggesting you found something you want to claim independently outside university protocols. A political complication he hadn't anticipated. Academic ambition and institutional prestige were powerful motivators. Without concrete evidence, his vague warnings about cultural sensitivity sounded like excuses. "Give me 24 hours, Evan said. I'll send documentation that will justify the delay." After ending the call, he sat heavily at his desk. What could he share that would satisfy the university without endangering the river people? The wooden carvings were tangible artifacts, but revealing their true significance risked bringing unwanted attention. The crystal vibrated suddenly, water patterns shifting rapidly. When Evan held it to his ear, a new message played, coordinates nearby, a time that afternoon, and instructions to come alone at the appointed hour. Evan found himself standing at the river's edge, roughly half a kilometer downstream from his cabin. The location matched precisely with a junction point shown on the holographic map, a place where underwater tunnels connected to a larger chamber. He waited, uncertain what to expect. The surface of the river remained placid, giving no indication of the complex network beneath. Precisely at the specified time, the water before him began to ripple in concentric circles. A small whirlpool formed, then stabilized into an opening approximately 1 meter in diameter. From within, a group of river people emerged, led by the now familiar entity he'd communicated with previously. This time, however, they brought something new, a delicate, web-like structure composed of translucent fibers that undulated like underwater plants. The lead entity held it with evident care, approaching Evan with deliberate movements. "What is that?" Evan asked, fascinated and slightly apprehensive. The entity held it toward him, making a gesture of placing it over its own head, then pointing to Evan. "You want me to wear it?" Evan hesitated. "What does it do?" The crystal in his pocket vibrated. When he checked it, the water patterns formed a simple message. Understand, a translation device then. Something more sophisticated than the crystal recorder. Scientific caution urged restraint. The biological implications of interfacing with an unknown organism were significant. Yet the potential knowledge exchange was equally compelling. He had already crossed traditional scientific boundaries. This was simply another step toward understanding. "All right," Evan said. "I consent." The entity approached, carefully placing the web-like structure on Evan's head. The fibers were cool and damp against his skin, then seemed to vanish from physical sensation altogether. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. The river people's vocalizations, previously incomprehensible, resolved into perfect linguistic clarity. More than that, their thoughts, intentions, and emotional states became directly accessible, translated through the biological interface into concepts his human brain could process. "We have watched your kind for centuries," came the first complete communication. "Few have shown the respect and understanding you demonstrate." "I'm a scientist," Evan replied, aware that his thoughts were being similarly translated. "I seek knowledge, not exploitation. We know your dilemma. Your tribe demands evidence of our existence. This threatens our security. Yes, without something concrete, they'll send others to investigate." The entity considered this, communicating silently with its companions through water patterns Evan could now partially comprehend. "We will provide evidence that satisfies without revealing. But first, you must understand why we remain hidden." The web-like structure pulsed against Evan's scalp, and suddenly his mind filled with images. European diseases devastating river communities, hunters capturing their kind for exhibition, habitat destruction from mining and deforestation, the gradual retreat deeper underwater as human expansion threatened their existence. "Now you understand," the entity said as the visions faded. "Help us remain hidden, and we will share knowledge beyond your science's current understanding." "I will," Evan promised, overwhelmed by the responsibility but certain of his path forward. The translation matrix conveyed his sincerity directly, requiring no further assurance. Their pact was sealed. "You can't possibly be serious." "Evan," Dr. Alvarez's voice crackled through the satellite connection. "You're claiming a previously unknown indigenous group has granted you exclusive research access, but they refuse all other scientific contact." "Not exactly unknown," Evan replied carefully. "The historical documentation I sent you confirms European contact dating back to the 1600s. What's unprecedented is their willingness to share knowledge on conditional terms." He stood on his cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the river in amber tones. The package he'd sent to the university yesterday contained carefully selected evidence, detailed linguistic notes on a newly discovered Amazon dialect, botanical samples with medicinal properties unknown to modern pharmacology, and water analysis revealing microbial life with extraordinary adaptive capabilities. All true discoveries, all genuinely revolutionary for their respective fields, yet none revealing the complete truth about the river people. "The board is divided," Dr. Alvarez continued. "The botanical samples alone would justify a major research initiative, but your insistence on working alone raises concerns about verification protocols." "I understand their hesitation," Evan said, "but trust has been established through careful cultural respect. Additional researches would compromise that relationship." The call ended with tentative agreement. The archaeological team would be redirected to another site, while Evan received a 6-month extension on his grant to pursue this cultural biological interface study, with the stipulation that he provide monthly documentation of his findings. A diplomatic victory, if temporary. As night fell, Evan prepared for his next encounter with the river people. According to the crystal recorder's instructions, tonight would involve a significant ritual, one requiring his active participation rather than mere observation. He had cleared the cabin floor around the wooden carvings, creating an open space as directed. The spiral pattern was now fully exposed, with the central passage to the underground chamber open and accessible. At precisely 11 o'clock, ripples appeared in his water samples, signaling their approach. Minutes later, they emerged, not through walls this time, but up through the passage, more of them than he had seen before. Some carried vessels made of material similar to the crystal recorder, but larger, containing what appeared to be riverbed clay. The lead entity approached, carrying an empty bowl carved from the same wood as the face carvings. Through the translation matrix they had left with him, their communication was now clear. "Tonight we prepare the binding. Your presence completes the circle broken when you built upon our guardian's site." Evan nodded, understanding more than was directly stated. The wooden faces formed a protective seal around a critical junction in their network. His cabin had disrupted that seal, potentially exposing their civilization to detection. Now they would restore the balance while accommodating his continued presence. The ritual began with river people arranging themselves in precise positions around the spiral. The vessels of clay were placed at regular intervals. From each vessel, they extracted a handful of dark, glistening material that resembled mud, but moved with strange autonomy, almost as if alive. River clay from the sacred depths, came the explanation through the matrix. It remembers shapes and purposes. The lead entity handed Evan the wooden bowl. "Collect water from the river with your own hands. Bring it unwrought and flowing." Evan took the bowl and walked the short distance to the river's edge. Following instructions, he submerged his hands directly into the cool water, filling the bowl without touching its rim. The water seemed to respond to his intent, flowing more readily into the vessel than physics would suggest possible. When he returned to the cabin, the river people had completed their preparations. The clay from each vessel had been shaped into small replicas of the wooden face carvings, arranged to mirror the larger pattern beneath his floor. "Place the water at the center," the leader instructed. Evan carefully set the bowl in the middle of the spiral. Immediately, thin rivulets from the bowl began flowing outward along invisible channels in the floor, connecting to each clay figure in sequence. "Now we bind what was separated." The river people began a melodic humming that resonated with the water's movement. The clay figures absorbed the rivulets, growing slightly in size and beginning to glow with bioluminescence. The leader approached Evan with a small portion of the clay. "Your blood carries your intention. Add 3 drops to bind your purpose with ours." Evan hesitated only briefly before pressing a sterile lancet to his fingertip. 3 drops of blood fell onto the clay, which absorbed them immediately and began to pulse with a rhythm matching his heartbeat. The leader shaped the clay into a final figure, not a face like the others, but a small representation of Evan himself. This figure was placed at the edge of the spiral, outside the circle, but connected to it. "Now you may remain without breaking the seal. Your presence is acknowledged by the Guardians. Your purpose is recognized. Your knowledge-seeking is permitted within boundaries now established." As the ritual concluded, the clay figures hardened instantly, becoming permanent additions to the spiral pattern. The wooden face carvings responded, their eyes closing once more, but leaving narrow slits, not fully open, not fully closed. Watching, but accepting, Evan understood the profound significance. He had been granted a unique position, neither fully inside their world nor excluded from it. A bridge between knowledge systems, with solemn responsibility to both. The boundary was restored. The research could continue, and tomorrow would bring new discoveries under these newly established terms. 3 months had passed since the binding ritual. Evan's cabin had transformed into something between a scientific laboratory and a sacred space. The wooden carvings remained exposed, integrated into his daily life and research. His field notes had expanded into multiple volumes, each focused on different aspects of river people knowledge. Their biology, language, medicine, ecological management. The university remained satisfied with his carefully curated findings. Each month, he provided enough revolutionary data to justify his continued isolation. Medicinal compounds extracted from previously unknown plants, sustainable water purification techniques adapted from river people methods, linguistic analyses of what he presented as an endangered indigenous dialect, today marked a significant threshold. According to the crystalline recorder's instructions, he was to prepare for a journey beyond mere observation, into the underwater realm itself. Evan meticulously checked his equipment, waterproof cameras with specialized filters to capture bioluminescence, sample containers designed to maintain pressure equilibrium. His modified diving gear sat ready, though the crystal had indicated it would be unnecessary. At sunset, the river people emerged from the floor passage. Their leader carried something Evan had never seen before, a shallow basin containing what appeared to be a living membrane, pulsing gently in the fading light. Through the translation matrix, which he now wore comfortably, their communication flowed directly into his understanding. "Tonight, you cross the boundary between breathing worlds," the leader explained. "This will adapt your body temporarily." Evan examined the membrane with scientific curiosity. Approximately the thickness of tissue paper, it possessed a complex cellular structure unlike any terrestrial organism, semi-transparent, with visible capillaries forming intricate patterns. "A respiratory interface?" he asked, already intuiting its purpose. "It will extract oxygen from water as our gills do. Your lungs will receive what they need, though the sensation will feel unfamiliar at first." The implications were staggering, not just for his research, but for human medical science. Temporary respiratory adaptation without mechanical assistance could revolutionize everything from treatment of pulmonary conditions to deep-sea exploration, yet Evan understood the responsibility that came with this knowledge. Like everything the river people shared, it wasn't his to disseminate without their explicit permission. "The adaptation lasts one cycle of the moon above to moon below," the leader continued, using their term for approximately 5 hours. "Sufficient for what must be shown," Evan nodded, both excited and apprehensive. "I'm ready." The application process was surprisingly simple. The membrane adhered to his face like a second skin, covering his mouth and nose before seemingly dissolving into his pores. The sensation was briefly uncomfortable, a cooling tingle that spread through his respiratory system. "Breathe normally as we descend," came the instruction. "Your body will adjust." Led by the river people, Evan entered the passage beneath his cabin. They moved deeper than he had gone before, the tunnel gradually sloping downward until water began to pool around his feet. Then his knees, when the passage became fully submerged. Evan hesitated instinctively. "Trust the adaptation," the leader encouraged. "Your body is prepared." Taking a deep breath, Evan submerged his head. The first inhalation underwater triggered momentary panic before his body registered the oxygen flowing normally into his lungs. The membrane extracted what he needed directly from the water, filtering it into breathable air within his respiratory system. "Remarkable," he murmured, his voice sounding strange underwater but clearly audible. The river people led him deeper, moving with natural grace through underwater tunnels that gradually widened into larger passages. Bioluminescent organisms, similar to the moss he'd documented, provided ambient light, responding to their presence by increasing illumination as they passed. After 20 minutes of swimming, they entered a vast underwater cavern that took Evan's breath away. Dozens of structures rose from the cavern floor, shaped from living coral and river stone into dwellings that blended perfectly with the natural environment. Hundreds of river people moved through this submerged community, carrying out daily activities in an ecosystem entirely separate from the surface world. "Our central gathering place," the leader explained. "One of many throughout the river system. Children with more pronounced aquatic adaptations darted between the structures, their movements more fish-like than their elders. Some stopped to stare curiously at Evan. Clearly, human visitors were exceptionally rare. At the cavern's center stood a massive structure resembling a temple. its entrance flanked by larger versions of the wooden face carvings, these carved from coral rather than wood. Intricate patterns adorned its exterior, glowing with the same bioluminescence that illuminated the settlement. "The repository of our oldest knowledge," the leader explained. "Today we share a portion with you that relates to your research, the river's health and future." As they approached the temple, elders emerged to meet them. Unlike the younger river people, these individuals showed more extreme adaptations, almost entirely aquatic in appearance, with larger gill structures and eyes adapted for low light. Their scrutiny of Evan was intense, communicating among themselves in water patterns too complex for his translation matrix to fully interpret. Finally, one elder nodded, gesturing toward the temple entrance. "They accept your presence," the leader explained. "Now you will learn why your research must be guided by more than surface science alone." Evan followed them into the temple, where the true revelation awaited. The early morning sun filtered through the cabin windows, illuminating Evan as he carefully wrote in his new journal. The paper, a gift from the river people, was unlike any material he'd previously encountered, made from underwater plant fibers processed through their traditional methods. It accepted ink readily, but would remain intact even if submerged for months. 6 months had passed since his journey to the underwater temple. That night had transformed not just his research, but his fundamental understanding of the Amazon ecosystem and his place within it. The elders had shown him the river's complete history, from its geological formation to the present day, through a living memory system that made Western scientific records seem primitive by comparison. Most crucially, they had revealed the interconnected nature of the river's health, how their underwater civilization served as both monitor and maintainer of ecological balance. Their settlements were strategically positioned at critical junction points throughout the Amazon basin, where they performed rituals and biological interventions that Western science would classify somewhere between advanced biotechnology and environmental engineering. Evan turned the page, continuing his meticulous documentation. On the left side, he wrote his scientific observations in standard academic notation. On the right, he recorded the same phenomena using the river people's symbolic language of water patterns, which he had become increasingly fluent in. The journal represented something unprecedented, a true integration of two knowledge systems, typically separated by cultural and epistemological boundaries. Neither side held primacy. Each illuminated blind spots in the other's understanding. Outside his window, the river flowed peacefully. The knocking that had once terrified him had been replaced by scheduled visits. 3 times weekly, river people representatives emerged to exchange knowledge, collect samples, and monitor the research progress. His satellite phone chimed, Dr. Alvarez calling for their monthly update. "The sustainable filtration system is performing beyond expectations," Evan reported, referring to the water purification method he developed based on river people principles. "Contaminant removal at 99.8% efficiency with 0 chemical additives. The board is impressed," she replied. "There's talk of implementing pilot programs in communities affected by mining runoff. They want to know if you're ready to bring in a larger research team now that you've established such productive relationships with the local population." This was the delicate balance he constantly navigated, providing enough revolutionary findings to satisfy the university while protecting the river people's true nature and knowledge. "The relationship remains fragile," he answered carefully. "Expanding too quickly would jeopardize the trust we've built. I recommend implementing the filtration systems first, demonstrating good faith before increasing our presence." After concluding the call, Evan made his daily journey to the river's edge. Using the gill membrane they had provided for his regular visits, he submerged himself briefly, checking the monitoring stations they had jointly established at key points. The data confirmed what they had already known. Upstream mining operations were introducing heavy metals at concentrations that threatened both surface ecology, and the underwater civilization. But together, they had developed filtration systems that combined river people biological knowledge with Evan's engineering expertise, creating living barriers that could gradually restore balance. More important than the technological solutions was the unprecedented cooperation they represented. For the first time, human scientific knowledge was being applied with the guidance of a civilization that understood the river as a living system, not merely a resource. Returning to his cabin, Evan found a visitor waiting, Elder Thomas from the village, now a regular collaborator who served as liaison between Evan and the local human communities. The first filters have been installed upstream, the elder reported. Already the fishermen report clearer waters in the affected tributaries. And how are they explaining the technology to outsiders? Evan asked. Thomas smiled. Ancient indigenous knowledge combined with modern science. A perfect truth that reveals everything while explaining nothing. This was their shared strategy, implementing solutions without exposing the river people's existence. The indigenous knowledge attribution provided cultural protection while delivering real ecological benefits. As sunset approached, Evan prepared for the monthly council meeting. Unlike his regular exchanges with individual river people, these gatherings included both elders from underwater settlements and representatives from villages along the river, humans who had long known of their aquatic neighbors but protected their secret through generations. Together, they were mapping a sustainable future for the entire Amazon basin, one where the river people could maintain their civilization while human communities developed more harmonious relationships with the ecosystem. Evan's position remained unique, neither fully part of either world, but trusted by both. A bridge between knowledge systems, between species, between possible futures. He placed his integrated journal carefully in his pack. Tonight, they would review progress on water quality in the southern tributaries and finalize plans. For the next phase of restoration, the wooden face carvings watched him with their partially open eyes as he prepared to leave. No longer mysterious guardians, but familiar allies in an ongoing collaboration. The knocking that had once heralded confrontation between worlds had transformed into a steady rhythm of cooperation. 3 gentle taps that now signaled connection, rather than warning. The river had many voices, Evan had learned, and finally they were being heard as one.